If you love intense HFY stories where humanity turns fear into strength, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next battle. Your support helps this channel bring you more powerful sci-fi stories full of emotion, strategy, and unforgettable human moments. The royal preparation chamber of House Vale was too calm for a room dressing a child to sit inside history. Princess Lyra Vale stood on a low silver platform while three attendants fastened layer after layer of pale blue ceremonial fabric around her small body, smoothing collars, pinning shoulder clasps, adjusting the little luminous threads stitched into the hem so they would glow properly beneath summit light. The robe was soft everywhere except the neck, which pressed lightly against her throat every time she turned her head. And because she was 6 and had not yet learned to call discomfort dignity, she decided she disliked peace already. "Do all treaties feel like choking?" she asked. One attendant dropped a fastening pin. Another tried not to smile. Matron Usura, standing behind Lyra with the severe patience of someone who loved carefully, placed both hands on the child's shoulders and straightened them. "Treaties feel like restraint, little star. That is why they last longer than shouting." Lyra looked at herself in the mirror and saw a royal child staring back, silver hair brushed until it shone, a tiny line of ceremonial ink beneath each eye, hands too small for the sleeves meant to symbolize dynastic continuity. She felt less like the future of the Vera Dominion and more like a gift being wrapped for people who might not deserve it. "Will the humans stare?" she asked. The chamber changed at once. No one gasped, but the air tightened in the small polished space. Usura's face did not harden exactly. It settled. "Yes," the matron said, "they will be present." Lyra kept looking at her own reflection. "Do they really smile when they are angry?" One of the younger attendants made a soft, uncertain noise. Usura dismissed the others with a glance and waited until the door sealed behind them. Then she knelt so her eyes were level with Lyra's. "Humans do many things with their faces that wiser species keep private. That sounds dishonest." "It sounds practiced," Usura said, and that was not the same thing at all. Lyra turned her head despite the stiff collar. "If they are dangerous, why are we making peace?" Usura opened her mouth, but the answer belonged to someone else. Queen Marith entered the chamber without announcement, because a queen needed no herald in her own house, and the quiet bent around her. She wore mourning colors disguised as state colors, deep silver and dusk blue, and the crown on her brow was elegant enough to look light until someone noticed how still she held her neck beneath it. Lyra slipped from the platform and went to her at once. Marith bent and gathered her in, one hand smoothing the back of the child's robe as if calming fabric might calm blood. "Because war is very expensive," the queen said, "and because some victories cost so much they begin to resemble losing." Lyra looked up. "Did we lose?" Marith's expression changed too slightly for most adults to catch. "We survived," she said, which was not an answer and therefore had to be the truth. Lyra hesitated, then asked the wrong question anyway, as children always did when adults wanted reverence more than honesty. "Did humans kill Aunt Serene?" Usura looked toward the windows. The queen did not. "Humans were there," Marith said. "Humans were at the convoy. Humans were at the border fires. Humans were at the last things many of us remember before the war ended." Lyra lowered her voice. "Sometimes I dream somebody carrying me." The queen's hand stilled against her shoulder. "Dreams are untidy after smoke, but there is always a voice." "Dreams borrow voices," Usura said too quickly. Lyra looked from one adult to the other and understood in the child way that both answers were incomplete. Marith touched her daughter's cheek with 2 fingers. "You do not need to love peace today," she said softly. "You only need to sit through it." Then her tone sharpened by a degree. "Stay with Usura. Do not wander. And if any human speaks to you, you answer only if you must." Lyra frowned. "Why?" The queen's face became suddenly less royal and more afraid. "Because fear is not always loud, little star. Sometimes it is charming." On the far side of the station, Sergeant Elias Marrow stepped off the human shuttle and felt trouble before he saw anything deserving the name. Meridian Spindle floated above a blue-white planet in precise diplomatic grace, its rings bright, its windows polished, its public halls built to suggest that civilizations could disagree elegantly if enough silver alloy and neutral architecture were placed between them. Elias distrusted elegance on principle. It hid hard edges too well. Ambassador Karina Holt descended the ramp ahead of him, composed as ever, while Milo Finch followed with a supply case broad enough to deserve voting rights. "I hate stations that smell expensive," Milo muttered. "You always end up bleeding on something symbolic." Elias' mouth moved by half an inch. Try not to stain the peace. I make no promises if peace is upholstered. Administrator Valen Sor met them at the receiving platform with practiced courtesy and tired eyes. Elias shook the offered limb and looked past the administrator while Holt handled greetings. Security shutters recessed in decorative seams. A camera angle just slightly wrong near the north corridor. One guard paying more attention to the upper balcony than to the delegation he was assigned to monitor. Nothing actionable, nothing innocent either. Milo caught the direction of his gaze and sighed. That face again. Which one? The one where you start noticing details nobody wants to explain later. Elias did not answer because, at that moment, a maintenance light in the station garden flickered 3 times in an uneven rhythm that felt more like a warning than a fault. He crossed toward it without asking permission and opened the service panel with a technician's borrowed tool while the diplomats continued their polished lies nearby. You are repairing station infrastructure on arrival, Milo said. Bold, light was wrong. Everything is wrong. That is diplomacy. Elias had just reset the damaged contact strip when he felt eyes on him and looked up to find a child standing at the edge of the garden path. Princess Lyra Vale was smaller in person than state briefings made royal children seem, wrapped in ceremonial blue, hands folded too tightly, golden eyes enormous with that careful fear children wore when they had been warned about something before understanding it. Elias lowered the tool at once and crouched by the panel instead of rising to his full height. You do not have to come closer, he said. I'm only fixing the light. Lyra stared as though the answer had ruined a prepared thought. You are human, Milo, still at the wall panel, said. Unfortunately, yes. Elias ignored him. I am. Lyra looked at the lamp above him, now steady. Why fix it? Elias set the tool on the floor where she could see both his hands. Because dark corners make nervous people more nervous. For the first time, something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not even comfort. Recognition, perhaps, that he was the first adult that day who had not asked her to be still for someone else's sake. Then Uzura appeared at the garden arch with alarm already rising in her face. Princess, Lyra straightened. Elias looked back down at the panel, giving the child an easier exit than explanation. When she turned to go, she paused just once and said, very quietly, the light is better now. Elias nodded without looking up. Good. After she disappeared with her matron into the bright diplomatic machinery of the station, Milo closed the service panel and glanced sideways at him. Well, he said, either that was nothing, or we just met the future of a species that is about to hate us professionally. Elias watched the corridor where the child had vanished and felt, for reasons he could not yet name, that the wrong people had spent too long teaching her where danger lived. Maybe, he said, or maybe somebody taught her the wrong shape. The ceremony hall of Meridian Spindle had been built by neutral architects, which meant it was elegant, symmetrical, and quietly hostile to anyone who entered it carrying memory. The ceiling arched high in silver curves beneath a field of projected stars. The floor was black polished stone that reflected every robe, uniform, and expression with insulting clarity. And at the center stood 2 raised platforms facing one another across a thin line of white light. One belonged to the Vera Dominion. One belonged to the human delegation. Between them hovered the treaty recorder, a transparent column of pale blue energy designed to look sacred and impartial, as if machines could cleanse politics by glowing correctly. Princess Lyra sat beside Queen Marith on a smaller ceremonial seat built low enough for witness cameras to see her face clearly and high enough that she could not plant her feet firmly on the ground. She hated that most of all. A child who could not brace herself felt like a decoration, not a person. And decorations were expected to survive quietly while adults decided which version of the future deserved to live. Matron Uzura stood a respectful pace behind her, close enough to intervene if Lyra forgot herself, close enough to remind the room that royalty was still raised by hands before it was governed by titles. Across the hall, the human delegation took their places beneath cooler lights. Ambassador Karina Holt stood in dark formal black with nothing glittering on her except the restraint in her posture. Behind her, Sergeant Elias Marrow settled into the kind of stillness that only looked calm to people who had never watched dangerous men decide what mattered. Milo Finch hovered beside him with a diplomatic case pressed to one leg and the expression of someone who expected ceremony to become medical work at any moment and resented the inefficiency of that conversion. Lyra had been told not to look at the humans for long, but rules like that only made the eyes rebellious. She looked once and then away, and then once more because one of them was familiar in a way her mind refused to explain. Sergeant Marrow did not resemble the stories. He was broad-shouldered, yes, and carried his body like a man who knew where his weight belonged, but he did not smile with predatory pleasure or scan the room like he wanted to own it. He was watching doors, lights, cameras, the upper balcony, a side corridor near the northern arch, and then, for one impossible half-second, he was watching her. Not the way officials watched her, measuring posture and symbolic value. The way one checks whether a child is frightened enough to miss the obvious. Lyra looked down at her own hands before Uzura could catch the exchange. The opening formalities began. Queen Marith stepped toward the recorder and spoke with the sort of controlled grace Lyra had grown up mistaking for strength. "The Vera Dominion comes carrying grief, caution, and the burden of remembering," she said, her voice translated into 13 languages without losing its cold music. "We do not stand here because history has become simple. We stand here because the future grows smaller every time the dead are asked to govern the living." Murmurs moved through the Vera witness tier, not disagreement, just the private sound of old pain hearing itself named in public. Then Ambassador Holt answered from the opposite platform. "Humanity comes carrying its dead as well," she said. "But we have learned that memory without restraint becomes appetite, and appetite has never once built peace." Lyra did not know what appetite had to do with treaties, but the word lodged in her mind. Beside the recorder, the white line of light remained steady. Above them, the star projection shifted almost imperceptibly as the station rotated. Somewhere far behind the ceremony walls, hidden machinery hummed its indifferent song. Elias heard the wrongness before he could see all of it. A guard near the northern service arch changed posture 3 minutes early, not enough to alarm ceremonial command, but enough to jar against the rhythm he had been building in his head since the delegation arrived. One of the overhead cameras rotated 2 degrees and created a blind wedge behind a column line that no neutral architect would have allowed without a request from security. Admiral Rayler Dask stood among the Vera military witnesses in dark command, armor polished to a mirror sheen, every inch the obedient hardliner, and yet one of his escort positions was filled by a 6th officer not listed on the summit manifest. Elias did not move. Moving would make the room notice him, and right now he wanted the room noticing speeches, robes, and protocol while he went on noticing the details that did not belong. Milo leaned the slightest fraction closer and murmured, "You are making the face again." Elias kept his eyes on the northern arch. "Which one?" "The one where I regret not bringing the uglier emergency bag." "You brought the ugly one." "I brought the medium ugly one." "There are tiers to preparedness." Elias tapped 2 fingers lightly against the inside of his wrist. "Human security only. Check escort count. Do not escalate." The acknowledgement came back against his skin half a second later. "Good, quiet." Across the hall, Lyra heard none of that. She heard only Uzura's whisper behind her. "When the witness call comes, step down, stop at the second light mark and keep your shoulders square." Lyra nodded because nodding was easier than admitting that her chest felt strange. Not fear exactly. More like the room had begun leaning toward a shape only one person had noticed. The witness call came with a soft chime. The chief arbiter rose above the hall and said, "Let the child of tomorrow stand within the record of peace." Uzura helped Lyra down from the ceremonial seat. The little heels of her formal shoes touched the black stone and made no sound. She took the first step, then the second, then looked up because something in the light had changed. The camera above the northern arch went dark, not flicker, dark. Elias moved at once, not toward the center, but half a pace sideways so his body had line of sight on the service corridor. He saw the first shape before the first blast. "Ambassador," he said quietly. Holt did not turn. "I know." The explosion came from the upper gallery, a hard directed charge that ripped through the balcony rail and hurled white-uniformed ARC peacekeepers into the lower steps. The treaty recorder flashed from blue to angry red. Smoke rolled down from the shattered projection dome. Screams broke across the hall like glass. Vera guards surged toward the Queen. Human security formed around Holt. False signal markers lit the eastern wall and human-coded weapon burst so clean Elias felt sick the moment he saw them. Too obvious, too ready, framing fire. He drew his sidearm and kept it low. "No one returns a shot into smoke," he snapped into his channel. "Visual confirmation only." Then he saw Princess Lyra disappear behind silver armor moving toward the northern blind wedge, and when Matron Uzura shouted, "Not him," Elias finally understood what the attack was really for. The first false guard had almost reached the northern service arch with Lyra before the hall understood that the attack was no longer only an attack. It was a theft. Smoke poured down from the broken upper gallery in soft gray sheets that made every silver uniform look briefly loyal and every shadow worth fearing. Queen Marith was shouting her daughter's name somewhere behind a wall of moving guards. Ambassador Holt had human security closing around her in a disciplined wedge that looked exactly wrong beneath the flickering false weapon markers. The treaty recorder spat red light over the floor, turning polished stone into a wound. Lyra's wrist hurt. That was the first clear thing left in the world. The hand dragging her through the smoke was gloved in royal silver, but the grip was too hard, too practiced, too indifferent to whether a child stumbled. She twisted once and saw the crest on the guard's shoulder fully this time. The crescent was reversed. She knew it was wrong with the blind certainty children often had for details adults called too small to matter. "You're hurting me," she said. The false guard bent close enough that she smelled burned oil under the ceremonial polish. "Move." It was not a command meant for a princess. It was something said to cargo. Behind them, Matron Usura had pushed herself up on one elbow through smoke and pain and was trying to point with a shaking hand. "Lyra, no," she cried. "Not him. He is not royal guard." That shout cut through the hall harder than the explosion had. Elias Marrow saw it land. He also saw what would happen if he ran at the child with his weapon up. Every frightened eye in the room was already waiting for the first human shape to look guilty. One bad second and the lie would become memory before truth even found its feet. So he did the only thing that did not serve the trap. He lowered his sidearm. Milo Finch hissed from behind the shattered treaty column. "That is an objectively terrible plan." Elias slid the weapon across the broken floor toward him without taking his eyes off the child. "Carry the bag and my dignity," he said. Then he stepped through the smoke with both hands open and dropped to one knee. He did not reach for Lyra. He did not call her like she belonged to him. He simply made himself smaller in the middle of chaos and said, in the same calm voice he had used by the garden light princess, "Look at me." Lyra did. She did not mean to. She only found that voice more easily than she found air. The false guard tightened his grip, trying to pull her farther into the blind wedge near the arch. Elias did not move closer. His left hand rested flat against the floor so she could see it. His right stayed lifted, empty. "Your choice," he said softly through the smoke and alarms. "But choose now." It was such a strange thing to hear in a room full of orders that for one impossible heartbeat the whole hall seemed to hesitate around it. No one had given Lyra a choice all day. Not the attendants, not the cameras, not even her mother, who loved her enough to fear for her and therefore spoke in warnings. Every adult had been pulling her toward duty, away from shame, into safety, out of danger. Even now one hand was dragging her and another voice was calling her from far across the wrecked ceremony floor. But the human was the only one not pulling. That broke something, or perhaps it repaired it. The false guard felt her hesitation and tried to force the moment shut. He shifted his weapon up behind her shoulder, using her body without quite revealing that he was doing it, and said, "Move, little star." The endearment was wrong in his mouth. Elias heard it too. His face did not change, but Lyra saw something harden behind the calm. He still did not lunge. He only held her eyes and said, "If you come, I take you to your mother. Not to my side, not away." To her, Lyra's breath caught. Somewhere deep under memory and smoke, another voice opened like a door in fire. "Small steps. Keep breathing. I've got you." She did not understand the memory, only the certainty that came with it. So she made the choice before fear could rebuild itself. She twisted hard out of the false guard's grip, dropping lower than the ceremonial robes had any right to allow, and ran. Not toward silver armor. Not toward the queen she could no longer see. Straight through the drifting smoke toward the human on one knee. A shot cracked behind her, then another. The room made a sound she would remember for years, not one scream, but a collective intake of disbelief as the royal child of House Vale crossed the broken treaty floor and threw herself at a human soldier. Elias caught her only because she chose him. He wrapped one arm around her shoulders, turned his body between her and the gunfire, and took the momentum of her fear without making it feel like capture. "Down," he said, and she obeyed instantly, because his voice had stopped sounding like language and started sounding like survival. He carried her the short distance behind the shattered treaty recorder as another shot burst white sparks from the floor where he had been kneeling. Milo, now clutching both the diplomatic supply case and Elia's sidearm with equal personal resentment, fired one clean stun round into the false guard's shoulder. The man staggered back into the smoke. "For the record," Milo shouted, ducking as debris rained from the broken ceiling, "I remain deeply unsuited for heroic work." "Keep being unsuitable," Elias answered, lowering Lyra behind the recorder's cracked casing. Her hands had locked into the front of his uniform. She was shaking so badly the little ceremonial lights at her sleeves rattled. Elias did not try to pry her loose. He only leaned close enough that she could hear him under the alarms. "Princess, eyes here," she lifted them. "Good, small steps now. Breathe with me. In, out, again." She did because some part of her had done it before. The false guards were regrouping at the edge of the smoke, their royal disguises gone crooked under the emergency lights. One shouted into a hidden comm, "Asset loose. Human interference." Elias heard the word and knew at once what this really was. Not rescue, recovery, not protection, ownership. He pressed a compact emergency filter from Milo's open case into Lyra's hands and said, "Cover your mouth, stay low. I'm moving you to your mother." Her eyes searched his face with all the frightened seriousness of a child deciding what kind of world she lived in. "You won't take me," she whispered. Elias checked the angle of the nearest column, the Queen's last known position, the two real Vera guards pinned near the eastern line, and the false guard closing again through smoke. Then he looked back at her. "No," he said. "I told you the truth." The side corridor sealed with a heavy metallic boom that shook dust from the ceiling seams and cut the screams of the main hall into something distant and broken. For one breath, nobody moved. Red emergency lighting pulsed through the passage in slow, uneven waves, turning silver walls into old blood and polished treaty carvings into accusations. Sergeant Elias Marrow listened first because rooms always told the truth before people did. Behind the sealed shutter, the attackers had not left. He could hear them shifting, controlled, not panicked, which meant the false guards had expected a secondary route. Ahead, the corridor bent toward the service spine. Between those two directions stood Princess Lyra wrapped in smoke and disbelief, Matron Uzura bleeding from the temple, Captain Surin with one arm hanging wrong at her side, Milo Finch already dropping beside his emergency case like a man taking cover with his oldest friend, and two civilian witnesses who had survived the haul by pure unhappy luck. "Milo," Elias said quietly, eyes still on the shutter, "tell me you packed something useful." Milo snapped the case open and began pulling items out with offended efficiency. 2 child filters, 3 adult filters, 1 cracked recycler, emergency tape, heat patches, glucose gel, 1 portable relay fork, and for reasons I am about to defend with great dignity, a stuffed rabbit. Uzura stared at him. "Why would you carry a stuffed animal to a peace summit?" Milo did not look up. "Because civilization repeatedly proves it cannot be trusted to arrange its own priorities." Lyra was still staring at Elias as if the smoke had peeled some older picture out of him and left it where she could not ignore it. The white bird patch on his sleeve, half worn from years of service and repairs, had become something more than cloth. "The fire," she whispered. Elias crouched slightly so he was not looming over her, though his shoulder had begun to bleed through the torn formal black at an inconvenient pace. "Princess, breathe first, memory second." She swallowed hard. "You said that too." Uzura looked from Lyra to Elias with a face that had stopped belonging to certainty and started belonging to fear. Captain Surin pressed her back against the wall and checked the corridor corner. "If the child is remembering something, it can wait until we are not trapped." Elias nodded once. "Correct. Move her behind the service column." Lyra obeyed because his voice had somehow become something simpler than authority. It sounded like the shape of surviving. Milo handed her a child-sized filter and she put it on without being told twice. That, more than anything else, made Elias understand how frightened she really was. Children resisted things when they still believed control belonged to them. Immediate obedience meant fear had already spent too much. A smooth voice came through the sealed shutter from the other side, amplified just enough to sound official and just soft enough to sound kind. "Princess Lyra, recovery unit, open the door." Uzura's eyes widened with sudden rage. "That is not a royal code." The voice returned, warmer now, sharpened by private familiarity. "Little star, your mother is waiting." Lyra flinched so hard the silver blanket around her shoulders rustled like leaves. Elias turned his head just enough to keep her in his peripheral vision. "People trying to help do not need tricks," he said. "And they do not use names like hooks." The cutting tool hit the other side of the shutter with a hard metallic shriek. Sparks spat through the seam. Surin raised her weapon with one good hand. We cannot hold this door long. Elias looked at the corridor map burned into his memory from one fast glance during arrival prep. What's ahead? Surin pointed with her muzzle. Maintenance spine, then arbitration alcove, then back into the rear of the ceremony hall. Milo froze halfway through stuffing equipment back into the case. Arbitration alcove. The one with independent relay authority. Surin gave him a sharp glance. Yes, Milo's whole face changed. That is not an alcove. That is a miracle with cables. Elias caught the shift at once. Say the important part in fewer words. Milo held up the portable relay fork like a priest displaying a relic. If we get to that node, I can authenticate any live recording directly into the Summit archive. No delegation can bury it once it is in. Lyra looked up from behind the filter. The truth machine. Milo blinked. I prefer that actually. Uzura pressed her palm to the wound on her head and looked at Elias with something close to shame. If she remembers you from the convoy. Elias cut her off gently because this was neither the minute nor the place for adults to fall apart. Then we prove it somewhere useful. The cutter on the far side bit deeper. Metal began to curl inward. The attackers had stopped speaking. That meant they were past persuasion and into retrieval. Elias checked his sidearm, then looked at Lyra. Can you walk? She nodded too fast. He waited. Not bravely. Honestly, her throat worked. Yes, I can walk if you keep talking. His expression softened by a degree. That sounds expensive. Fine, small steps. Keep breathing, same as before. Uzura stared at him. Before, Lyra answered for him, eyes never leaving his sleeve patch. The fire. The cutter punched through completely. Surin fired once through the gap before the first false guard could clear the opening. He dropped backward with a barked curse. Elias moved in the same second, bracing one shoulder against the failing door. Milo, already offended and moving. Elias shoved. The damaged shutter blew outward hard enough to catch the second attacker in the chest and drive him off balance. Surin hit him low. Elias did not try to win the corridor. He created exactly enough confusion for movement. Go, he said. They ran in an ugly staggered line through the maintenance spine, not graceful, not heroic, just alive. Surin took point, turning corners by instinct and architecture. Uzura kept one hand on Lyra's shoulder. Elias stayed behind them with Milo and the two civilians, giving ground in measured pieces whenever gunfire cracked from the rear bend. He shot only when he had a body and not a shape. The false guards were still trying not to damage the princess, which made them cautious in all the wrong places. Milo, dragging the emergency case with one hand and a wounded civilian with the other, muttered between breaths, I was not informed diplomacy included corridor treason. You were issued the bag, Elias replied. That was warning enough. Lyra made a tiny noise that might have been a laugh if fear had not still been using her lungs. At the next junction, a shot struck the wall beside Elias and tore a bright line across his upper shoulder. He grunted but kept moving. Lyra turned at once. You're bleeding. People do that, he said. Very different problem. Surin hit the arbitration door control with her clearance blade and the hidden panel slid open on a pocket room full of neutral white light, dusty relay consoles, and the kind of overlooked authority that only mattered when the wrong people wanted truth dead. Milo stumbled in like a pilgrim reaching holy ground. Everyone who mocked quartermaster redundancies may apologize in writing later. He slammed the recorder into the console port. Blue light flared. The system voice woke around them, calm and impartial. Evidence authentication requires source declaration. Elias looked at Lyra. She looked back, breathing too fast but standing on her own feet. Then the child stepped forward into the white light, clutching the drive in both hands and said, Princess Lyra Vale, royal witness, I have the truth. The arbitration alcove had not been built for heroics. It was a narrow technical chamber hidden behind ceremonial architecture, all neutral white panels, old relay conduits, and a console that had spent decades proving smaller truths than this one. Yet the room changed the moment Princess Lyra Vale stepped into its pale light and offered the evidence drive with both hands. The console voice softened by no measurable degree, but everyone heard the difference anyway. Royal witness accepted, it said. Evidence chain pending. Milo Finch moved instantly, sliding into the operator position with the focused desperation of a man who believed every civilization should come with better labeling. If this elegant machine rejects us because someone forgot to update treaty firmware, I am going to become historical in an unflattering way, he muttered. Captain Surin took the corridor side with her weapon raised, blood still running down the seam of her sleeve. Uzura stayed beside Lyra, one hand hovering near the child's shoulder without quite touching, as if guilt had made her afraid of claiming rights she no longer trusted herself to deserve. Sergeant Elias Marrow stood half-turned between both worlds, one eye on the console, the other on the door. He was bleeding more than he liked, but not enough to matter yet. Not while the truth was still trapped in a box and men with royal crests were trying to reach it first. Milo fed the recorder in. First the corridor audio. Rayler's hidden order filled the room in flat, damning clarity. The princess must not reach the queen with the human alive. If Marrow is identified, the Ashen Gate record becomes vulnerable. Recover the child. Remove the witnesses. Nobody spoke for a second. Even the emergency alarms outside seemed to recede in order to let betrayal land properly. Then came Surin's oath verification and Uzura's trembling confirmation that the fake guards had worn reversed crests and private palace language. The console accepted each piece with cold professional light. Cross-source continuity confirmed. Milo swallowed. Good machine. Elias reached slowly into the inside panel of his formal coat and pulled out something small, sealed, and old. A battered data chip, edges worn from being carried longer than practicality required. Lyra stared at it before he even explained. What is that? Elias looked at the chip, then at her. A thing I never deleted. Uzura closed her eyes as if the sentence itself was already an accusation. He slotted the chip into the relay port. The image that appeared above the console came in fragments first. Smoke, hull fire. A corridor tilted sideways under emergency red. Then the view steadied enough to show a younger Elias in scorched rescue armor cutting into a ruined evacuation pod while metal screamed around him. The white bird patch on his sleeve flashed through ash. There beneath a collapsed support frame was a child wrapped in silver ceremonial cloth and soot, small, silent, alive. Elias' recorded voice, younger and rougher, filled the alcove. Small steps, keep breathing, I've got you, only this minute matters. Lyra made a sound too small to be called a cry and too broken to be called anything else. Her hands closed around the edge of the console as if it were the only solid thing left. It was me, she whispered. Elias did not answer immediately because some truths deserved the dignity of not being rushed. Yes, he said at last. I think it was. Uzura sat down before her legs quite agreed to it. The matron did not collapse dramatically. She simply folded in on herself, the way people did when the lie they had helped maintain finally chose to become visible. The official record said Loyal Vera recovered her from the wreckage, she whispered. Milo, still working the console, replied without looking up. Official records are deeply confident for something humans keep disproving with cables. Surin shot him a quick look. Less commentary. I am using commentary to remain calm. The console pulsed bright blue. Evidence chain verified. Broadcast authority available through emergency arbitration. Elias turned toward the hallward corridor. That means we walk it in alive. Surin understood at once. If we transmit from here, Rayler claims fabricated insertion. Yes, if the princess carries it into the hall, he loses the room before he loses the floor. Elias nodded. Lyra lifted her face from the console light. There were tears there, but also something harder now, something that had crossed out of fear and into purpose without stopping to ask permission. Then I carry it, she said. Uzura looked at her in horror. Little star, no, Lyra's voice shook, but it held. He told me the truth when everyone else told me fear. She looked at Elias then, not like a symbol, not like a soldier, but like a child finally matching a voice to a life. If I hide now, they keep both stories. The door exploded inward before anyone could answer her. Not a careful cut this time. A shaped entry burst that threw white dust and splintered paneling across the alcove. The first false guard came through low and fast. Surin shot him before his boot fully cleared the threshold. Elias moved in the same instant, catching the second attacker by the wrist, slamming the weapon arm into the broken frame and driving him back into the corridor. Milo made a startled sound, grabbed the evidence drive from the console, and shoved it into Lyra's hands. Congratulations, he said breathlessly. You are now carrying constitutional panic. A third attacker fired from deeper in the hall. The bolt clipped the relay bank, showering the room in sparks. Elias twisted, shielding Lyra and Uzura with his body while Surin returned fire. Move, he said. Now. They burst out of the alcove in a running knot of urgency and bad angles. Surin took the lead. Lyra stayed in the middle, wrapped in silver and clutching the truth to her chest. Uzura kept one hand on her shoulder. Milo stumbled behind them with the emergency case and the wounded civilian witness somehow still attached to his orbit. Elias took rear cover, firing only when he had a clear body and not merely a shape in smoke. The service spine shook under another distant blast from the ceremony hall. "How far?" Milo asked. Surin did not look back. "One lift junction, then the rear witness entry," Milo panted. "Marvelous. I have always wanted to deliver evidence into active treason." A shot tore across the passage and struck Elias high on the side, spinning him hard enough to catch the wall. Lyra turned instantly. "You're hurt." He steadied himself and kept moving. "Professionally, that is not a real answer. It is currently the only one in budget." Even frightened, she almost smiled. That was enough. At the final turn, the doors to the rear witness entry stood half open. Beyond them, the shattered light of the main hall and the sound of two armed truths trying to decide which one would reach history first. Elias looked down at Lyra one last time. "When we step through, everyone will look at you." Lyra tightened her grip on the drive. "Then they can finally hear me too." When the service doors opened behind the witness tier, the hall turned toward the sound as one body. Smoke still drifted beneath the broken dome. The treaty recorder flashed weak white through a shell of cracked crystal. Human security held the western line with weapons lowered but ready. Vera royal guards held the eastern approach with the strained posture of soldiers who did not yet know which betrayal mattered more. In the middle of it all, Princess Lyra Vale stepped out of the rear passage wrapped in a silver emergency blanket and carrying the arbitration drive in both hands like something fragile enough to break the room if she held it wrong. Sergeant Elias Marrow emerged behind her, one shoulder dark with blood, weapon down at his side, while Milo Finch stumbled after them with the emergency case and the unmistakable expression of a man who would later insist this had not been in his job description. Queen Marith turned first. For a moment she did not look like a sovereign at all. She looked like a mother who had already buried the possibility of hearing her child's voice again and did not trust the return of it. "Lyra," she said. The child took one step toward her, then stopped when Admiral Rayler Dask moved into the line between them. His voice came out smooth, authoritative, and just loud enough to sound like stability. "Your Majesty, do not approach." The humans have had time to coach her. Elias did not answer. That mattered more than any denial. If he spoke first, the Admiral could turn truth into argument. Lyra looked up at Rayler instead, and whatever little girl had once sat obediently in blue ceremony silk was still there, but now she was standing inside her own memory with both hands on the door. "You called me an asset," she said. The hall tightened around the sentence. Rayler's expression did not change quickly enough. "Princess, you are frightened." "Yes," Lyra said. "That is not the same as wrong." Milo, breathing hard, held out one hand toward the damaged treaty recorder. "With everyone's permission and preferably no more explosions, we have verified arbitration evidence." He did not wait for permission because history rarely arrived through correct channels. He fed the drive into the recorder and the broken column flared white. The first audio filled the chamber in cold, neutral playback. "The princess must not reach the queen with the human alive. If Marrow is identified, the convoy record becomes vulnerable. Recover the child. Remove the witnesses. Admiral confirms authority." No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then Milo loaded the second file. Smoke bloomed above the hall in the form of old rescue footage. A ruined convoy shuttle. Fire crawling across buckled metal. A younger Elias in blackened rescue armor cutting through a collapsed frame while alarms screamed around him. The white bird patch on his sleeve flashed through the ash. Then the image found the child in the wreckage, tiny and half-conscious beneath twisted seating, wrapped in blood and silver ceremonial cloth. Elias' recorded voice came through the hall, younger, harsher, unchanged in the places that mattered. "Small steps. Keep breathing. I've got you." Queen Marith staggered as though the words themselves had struck her. Uzura made a sound that seemed torn directly out of some locked room inside her chest. On the eastern line, Captain Surin stepped forward despite the pain in her arm, and said in a voice built for oath halls, "I confirm reversed crests on the false guard unit. I confirm unauthorized recovery language. I confirm the Admiral's men moved the princess toward the blind wedge before the shutter seal." Rayler's control finally cracked. "Fabrication," he snapped. "Human theater stitched together with panic and old debris." Lyra turned toward her mother, then back to the room, and for the first time that day, she spoke not like a child dragged through events but like the witness they had dressed her to be. "He did not take me," she said, pointing to Elias without looking at him. "He knelt down and let me choose. Your men pulled. He waited. I remember the fire now. I remember the blanket. I remember his voice. If this is theater, then why did your lies know my nickname before he did?" That ended it. Not because every doubt vanished at once, but because the room had reached the point where one more lie would cost more than truth. Queen Marith crossed the shattered floor without asking whether her guards approved and stopped directly before Raylar. Her face had gone beyond fury into something quieter and more fatal. "You fed me grief until I called it memory," she said. "You placed my daughter inside a story and taught us both to live there." Raylar reached for the sidearm at his thigh, but the motion died halfway through. Human rifles rose. Vera blades shifted. Captain Surin leveled her weapon straight at his chest. "Do not," she said. Raylar looked around the hall and finally understood the shape of losing. It was not the humans. It was not even the evidence. It was the fact that the royal child had run to the human in public and now stood alive, remembering. "Peace will make you weak," he said, and the line fell flat because it had arrived too late to sound like doctrine and too early to count as regret. Queen Marith did not raise her voice. "No," she said, "your fear made us useful." Then she turned to her loyal guard and gave the order that would be taught for generations precisely because she did not hesitate. "Admiral Raylar Dask is under arrest for treason, falsification of war record, attempted murder and conspiracy against the royal line. Take him alive. I want him to survive long enough to hear the history corrected." After that, the room finally chose a side. Raylar's last loyalists were disarmed. Medics moved in through smoke and shattered glass. The treaty recorder, half broken and still stubbornly glowing, kept running as if it understood that some moments had no right to disappear. Queen Marith knelt before Lyra and touched her face with both hands, crown tilting, composure gone. "Little star," she whispered, "I told you to fear the wrong thing." Lyra's chin shook once. "I know." Then she turned and crossed the last few steps to Elias. No one stopped her this time. She looked up at him, at the blood on his shoulder, at the bird patch worn pale by years she had never been allowed to know, and said the words like a question, a memory, and a promise all at once. "Small steps." Elias, exhausted enough now that gentleness cost him nothing, lowered himself so he was nearer her height and answered, "Small steps." She took his uninjured hand. Around them, peace did not become easy. It became possible.